It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Mark Devlin, all the way from the UK. Well, it's great to be in New York. I'm happy to take any opportunity to get back here. I'm not sure I could ever take the pace of life living here, but I do find the place fascinating and it keeps drawing me back like a magnet. It's obviously got a rich history, and it's got very rich musical history. We're getting into some elements of that. Next slide, please. So this is my first visit to New York 25 years ago. This was June 1994. And I love this picture because you've got the Twin Towers in the background there, which had another 7 years to stand at that point. Next, please.
Hey Mark, what are those weird buildings behind you?
Exactly. I've never seen them before.
Sorry.
This was, fast forwarding a few years to 2010, and this was a very pivotal trip to New York for me because this was the time which I pinpoint as me having woken up, in inverted commas. So on this particular visit, I had a lot of time on the plane on the way over to read some stuff, and this was a culmination of a period where I've been asking a lot of big questions about what this life really is, this experience that we all go through, and who's really running things in this world. And I had a copy of David Icke's new book at the time, Human Race, Get Off Your Knees. And as I was reading it, I just felt all the puzzle pieces come together in my mind, and a light bulb went on, and so much started to make sense to me. So we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of that event next year, but because that happened, I'm here right now doing a talk like this, which I never imagined would be the case. Next slide, please. So, going back to 1999, this was a very prominent nightclub in the 90s, which anyone from New York may remember, known as Nels. There was a live music venue and also a nightclub. And I DJ'd in this place a few times, starting in 1999. So that was the beginning of me really starting to fall in love with New York, and I never imagined that I'd be trading that career, playing records at places like this, for what I'm doing now. But life really is a very strange thing. Next, please. So this talk is music's military and mind control connections. And I'm going to be addressing the popular music industry from a starting point of 1955, which I personally pinpoint as when the modern popular music game as we know it got going. It's my contention that the very reason for this industry being set up in the first place, both in America and Britain, with other countries to follow, was because of the incredible opportunities that music offers to mind control and socially engineer large numbers of people and plant ideas and perceptions and value systems into their subconscious mind without them being aware that it's going on. It's achieved under the guise of entertainment, and it's an ingenious way of getting it done. So we have a control system in place that has taken care to infiltrate and subvert and control every other aspect of human life, from the world of the military to science to education to the mainstream media to big business. So if they've taken the time and trouble to control all these walks of life, it's not very conceivable that they would leave entertainment out of the equation. And it's far more realistic that they would absolutely want to control every aspect of how this plays out. So we're taking it back to 1955, and the record Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comets, to my mind, really kicked off the contemporary or modern music industry going back several decades. It was a very radical change in style to the popular music that had gone before in the austere post-war years. And in 1955, everything kind of changed with the emergence of rock and roll music. Next slide, please. In 55, we had three very prominent movies which demonstrated how culture was changing and societal attitudes were changing. So James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, then The Blackboard Jungle, and the movie Rock Around the Clock itself, from which the song by Bill Haley was taken, very much demonstrated that society was changing, and I would suggest that it was being done according to various agendas. Next, please. When we look at some of the early record labels, the companies that put out these early acts, we find some very interesting things. This is where we get our first connections into the world of the military and military intelligence. So we can look at RCA, which stands for the Radio Corporation of America. I put out a podcast on this last year looking into the roots of this particular organization, and we find that it was originally developed by the US Navy. RCA spearheaded many of the standards in vinyl record production and spawned the RCA record label. Next, please. EMI, very similar situation with this particular company. Electrical Musical Industries is what it stands for. Next, please. And this is an excerpt from the book Tavistock Institute by Daniel Estulin. And in this particular section of the book, he lets us know what EMI is all about in terms of its roots. Led by the aristocrats of Joseph Lockwood, it stands for Electrical Music Industries. It's one of Britain's largest producers of military electronics and a key member of Britain's military intelligence establishment. And we're going to see this trend being repeated many times as we go through. Next, please. Similar situation with Decca Records. You find with many of these record labels, they have their roots in developing systems on behalf of the military. Oftentimes it's radio systems or sonar systems or other aspects of sound for military applications. And then they end up turning out labels releasing some of the big popular music acts of the time. So it gives us some clue as to, again, what the true roots of this industry were and its very inception. Decca, of course, is famous for having apparently turned down the Beatles to EMI's benefit, but it wouldn't surprise me with everything else I've come to learn if that wasn't some kind of manufactured stunt to help push the hype and the propaganda of the Beatles. Next, please. We have Music Row in Nashville, the home of country music. And this is a good example of a community in a particular city, a neighborhood, where all the music-related businesses are grouped together in one area, where it can be easily contained and easily controlled. Next, please. Similar thing with Tin Pan Alley in New York, in Manhattan, just a short distance from here. This is where the major music publishers of sheet music were based in the 1920s and 30s and going forward. And you had famous people like Irving Berlin and George Gershwin coming out of this particular area of Manhattan. But again, it was very closely contained in what's known as the Flower District of town. Next, please. Looking at some of the very early influential artists then, beyond Bill Haley and the Comets, they broke through in 1955. The following year, 56, you had the big breakthrough of Elvis Presley with Jailhouse Rock, Heartbreak Hotel, and all these big hits. And here he is pictured with Colonel Tom Parker, who was ostensibly his manager, but I would contest that he also played the role of his mind-controlled handler, because there's much evidence to suggest that Elvis was one of the very early mind-controlled artists who had undergone programming himself to ensure that he would stay with the program that was set out for him. Colonel Tom Parker wasn't a real colonel, he was actually a Dutchman. He's got a very Dutch-sounding name. He apparently entered the United States illegally under the radar, but got away with it and was allowed to stay. Served a little stint in the US military himself, but kept a very close leash on Elvis in his burgeoning career, and was there every step of the way to kind of influence the way that all panned out. Next, please. Here we have Elvis with a character that you may recognise, or you may not. If I was showing this slide in Britain, everyone would know who this is. Is everyone familiar with Jimmy Savile?
Yes.
Okay, so you've heard the stories about this guy. He was a prominent radio and television disc jockey in the formative years of the music industry from the 1950s going forward. He had a career with the BBC, that nice organisation that cares about us all so much, for around about 50 years. And the revelations came out in 2012 that Savile had in fact been a prolific child abuser, paedophile, for many, many decades. And much of what he got up to occurred on BBC premises, we're told, paid for by the licence fee payers of Britain, because we have to pay for television out there, believe it or not. So Savile was associated with all these major acts of the time, and you might argue that as a prominent disc jockey of that era, he would be expected to link up with all these artists. But you do find him getting absolutely everywhere. Next slide, please. Here he is with Cliff Richard, who emerged in the late 1950s, pretty much in the wake of Elvis Presley. And in the early days, he was very much marketed as a sort of British version of Elvis. He's been through many different style changes over the years. In the 1960s, he reinvented himself as a Christian singer. That's Christian in inverted commas. But when he first came out, he was this young sort of rock and roll star making music similar to what Elvis and Little Richard and all these guys were doing. So here he is with Jimmy Savile, and this could be deemed as a quite questionable link-up. Next, please. Here we have Cliff Richard with Lord Bob Boothby, who was a British politician in the post-war years, and had a very colourful private life when it comes to his extracurricular activities. The kind of parties that he frequented are not my idea of a night out, but I've lived a sheltered life. And Cliff Richard was very closely associated with Bob Boothby, leading many researchers to suggest that he may have been some sort of, well, Cliff Richard is very fond of suing, so I'll probably just leave that on. Next please. Here's Savile with the Beatles. And for a time, during 1964, I believe it was, when the Beatles were on the road in the UK, Savile went to a lot of their shows with them and was the opening act for them, introduced them on stage, and knocked about with them for quite some time. Next, please. Here's Paul and John of the Beatles with a very interesting handshake, which may give us some kind of suggestion as to how it was that the Beatles became as popular and influential as they did over and above all the other contenders that there were among the groups of the 1960s. I've done a whole presentation on occult aspects of the Beatles this year actually, which I've taken out on the road in the UK. It's going to get another outing in December, where I go in great detail into some of the occult symbolism and Freemasonic icons and motifs that you find cropping up when you look closely at Beatles imagery from these formative years. Next please. When it comes to Beatle wives, something becomes very interesting. And during this presentation, I've got a few New York-related anecdotes and New York-related observations to offer. And this is the first one. It doesn't concern New York City, but it concerns a town known as Scarsdale in Westchester County in New York. It's up there near White Plains. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Scarsdale, but there's something about it. So here we have Yoko Ono, who became the wife of John Lennon, and Linda Eastman, who became Linda McCartney, wife of Paul. Now it turns out that both of these women spent some of their formative years in the town of Scarsdale, against all the odds of this being a coincidence. So Linda grew up there, attended school and college, her family was based there. Yoko Ono's family came over from Japan. Her father was a prominent banker, and he split his time between Japan and the United States. And for a time, the family set up in Scarsdale, and Yoko came over from Japan to join the rest of her family. So you have both of these future Beatle wives growing up in the town of Scarsdale. Next slide, please. And like I say, there's something about Scarsdale, because when you look it up, you come to realise that many famous people and celebrities have either grown up there or have spent time there or have studied at the college or whatever, including, who have we got here? Judy Garland, Liza Minnelli, Elton Johnson, and all kinds of characters. So Scarsdale becomes a very interesting place to have a look at as to why it's so special. Next, please. So here's Paul McCartney with the guy that was known as the fifth Beatle, Sir George Martin, the producer, pretty much for their entire career. And George Martin was from an aristocratic family. He was part of the British establishment furniture. Of course, he got knighted by the Queen, as did McCartney. As to which one it is, I'll leave that for another presentation. Next, please. It's one of them. Here's George Martin at work at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. So it's part of the British Broadcasting Corporation, which itself is a propaganda arm of the British government, basically a state broadcaster. And the Radiophonic Workshop was there to experiment with sound, with what could be achieved with the manipulation of sound and frequencies and such. So that's where George Martin got his groundings before he hooked up with the Beatles. Next, please. We move on to this seminal piece of work from Dave McGowan, the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, which came out in 2014. Sadly, Dave McGowan is no longer with us. He passed away in 2015, but he left behind this incredible work, which really had a big effect on me, and it's influenced the kind of work that I'm doing now, because it caused me to question the heroes that we get served up to us on a pedestal, the celebrities that we're trained to idolize and to revere. It taught me to look at them in a slightly different way and not just take the public relations Wikipedia version of them that we're offered, but to look into some of their family backgrounds and their affiliations as to what they might always really be about. So this book focused on the counterculture hippie scene of the mid to late 1960s, coming out of the Laurel Canyon district of Los Angeles. Next, please. The major revelation from that book, which is often quoted and bears repeating because it really makes the point, is the family connections of Jim Morrison, frontman of The Doors. So Jim Morrison emerged in the mid-1960s ostensibly as this anti-war kind of larger-than-life rock god who stood for anti-establishment values and rejecting the man and all of this kind of stuff. That's the way he was positioned. But when you look into who his father was, as revealed by McGowan in this book, you find out that he was this guy here, Admiral George Stephen Morrison, and his big claim to fame is that he was the Navy Admiral in charge of the fleet of ships involved with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which effectively springboarded America into the Vietnam War. So somehow you've now got to reconcile the idea that the son is this rock god that's opposing the establishment values of his father's generation, and the fact that at the very same time that he emerges out of nowhere with these fully formed songs and his band The Doors, his father's out there basically starting the Vietnam War. Next, please. Many such other revelations from McGowan's book. We have David Crosby of The Byrds and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And McGowan revealed that this is where we get into the world of family bloodlines and the way that different expressions, different generations of the same bloodlines are put into prominent positions in society where they can have an influential effect. They're not all rock musicians. Sometimes they're put in there as politicians. Sometimes they're put in there as television presenters, Hollywood actors. But in many cases, in the 60s, they emerged as musicians. So we find out that David Crosby is the son of Major Floyd Delafield Crosby, coming from the Van Cortlandt family, originally from the Netherlands. So he goes here into some of this bloodline and some of his backgrounds. And it leads you to conclude, or it leads me to conclude, because I have a suspicious mind, you may have noticed, that David Crosby's rise to fame was not entirely down to hard work and good luck. And this is very rarely, if ever, the case. Next, please. So more from McGowan's revelations. He's going into Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young here. Then we get on to John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, a very influential group coming out of that counterculture scene, the flower power scene. His father was a career Marine Corps officer, would you believe? And his mother, sister and first wife were all career employees of the Defense Department at the Pentagon. And then we find out that John Phillips' first wife, Susie Adams, was a direct descendant of John Adams, America's second president. Nothing unusual about that, right? Next, please. And like I say, McGowan's work caused me to start looking into some of the backgrounds of interesting musicians, and we come across Jinx Dawson, Esther Dawson, to give her a real name, nicknamed Jinx. And she was a member of the band Coven, which emerged in the late 1960s, very much in the psychedelic vein of that time. Next, please. Now, this is in Esther Jinx Dawson's own words in terms of her family background. She gave this information in an interview, and here it all is. She says, "I'm of the Mayflower Society, a direct descendant of John Howland, the 13th signatory. Members of my family were also active in Freemasonry." God, that's very surprising. "My father was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason, and my grandfather, a former Lieutenant Governor of Indiana, was High Priest of the Royal Archmasons. My great-grandfather was in the private circle of US President Teddy Roosevelt, and were listed in the book, The First Families of America. So I'm steeped in American Illuminati. You don't say." Next, please. This guy is Jason Lindgren, and he's the frontman of the group Killing Joke. And Killing Joke have often put out songs which people perceive to be meaningful and uplifting and imparting knowledge. But this is a dynamic that I've identified many times in the music industry, whereby you're given a group and much of their output appears to be in that vein. And it's a way of endearing them to the public so that we think they're on our side, one of us, expressing the things that concern us. And it's a very clever tactic that's been used for decades, because when you look at who these people really are and where they come from, it tells a slightly different story. So here's Jazz Coleman giving it the Masonic shush sign, which indicates the keeping of secrets and oaths of allegiance to the order. Next, please. And here's a bit of information about him. And again, this comes from his own mouth. So in many cases, these people tell you about themselves. It's part of this tenet of revelation of the method, where they feel the obligation to give us the opportunity to know, so that we can never say that we weren't told. So he stated that his great-great-grandfather was Mangal Pandey, who led the insurrection against the British, and is revered in India as one of the great nationalists. Then there's B.N. Pandey, who wrote The Breakup of British India, and was very close to Gandhi. So again, are these credentials that you would expect from the average rock musician that's just played a few gigs and done a bit of hustling and met a few people and written a few songs? Or is it just another day at the office in terms of how the industry really works and how it selects its key players? Next, please. Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters, and before that, a part of Nirvana. And here he is giving the same shush sign as the previous guy. Isn't that interesting? Oh, and he's dressed up as the devil as well, but never mind that. Next, please. So here's a little bit about Dave Grohl. Are we starting to see a pattern emerging here? So Dave Grohl was earlier in a punk band out of DC. His father, James Harper Grohl, worked in politics as an assistant to Robert A. Taft Jr. Robert's father was William Howard Taft, the 27th President of the United States. Here we go again. And his father was Alfonso Taft, a founder of the Skull and Bones, a cult secret society operating out of Yale University. So we've come across Skull and Bones already today, and here it is with another outing, courtesy of a connection coming from Dave Grohl. Next, please. And this is just an interesting little aside to put in there. Dave Grohl dined out in a restaurant last year, and the bill for him and his friends apparently came to $333. So Dave, being the generous guy that he is, decided to round it up to $666 by way of a tip. Nice touch. Next, please. Bono. This is where everyone groans. If you're going to throw tomatoes, make sure it hits the screen and not me, please. So Bono, we're supposed to believe that Bono is a rock singer, right? That's it. How many rock singers do you really think could get up close and personal with this motley selection? Not that it's anything to be proud of, not that it's my idea of decent hobnobbing, but here he is with a very suspect cast of characters. Does an ordinary rock singer that's just worked his way up from the bottom get to achieve this? Probably not. Next. This is Barbara Hewson, and she's an Irish barrister. She's very controversial. She's hit the headlines many times in recent years. She's all about abortion rights for women. And her real claim to fame is her campaign to get the age of consent for children to have sex with grown adults lowered to the age of 13. As you can see, she's got really good family values. Next, please. Well, according to this article from Swamp, Barbara Hewson turns out to be related to Paul Hewson, better known as Bono. Hard to believe, I know, but stick with it. Next, please. So some family background into the Hewsons, this particular bloodline, which was dug up by an article that I found online. So the Hewsons originally came out of England, 15th century England. This guy, John Hewson, died around 1567, then Thomas Hewson, the new head of the family, would be made a freeman of the city of York. And then we find that the Hewsons eventually move out to Ireland. and that is the family bloodline that spawned Barbara Hewson, who gets put in there as a prominent barrister, a controversial one, and Paul Hewson, who emerges as the rock singer Bono and goes hobnobbing with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and all these people. So again, we come to realise that these people are put into these roles, and it's often by way of the families that they come from. Next, please. They know. Indeed. Next. Just got that one. And here we have Bob Geldof, good mate of Bono, of course, partner in many projects with him. And we find out some things about old Bob as well. Most people think that he's a full-blooded Irishman, but you go back into his genealogy and you find his grandmother was Jewish, so we have a bloodline going off in that direction. His real name is Sir Robert Frederick Zenon. It's a bloody gas, isn't it? Geldof. KBE, Knight of the British Empire, even though he's supposed to be Irish, right? Somehow he's got himself a KBE in the British honours system. So there's lots to know about Bob Geldof. I think we want to be out of here by about 7 or 8 or something, so I better not get into it now, because it'll take us till 2 in the morning. But Bob is not all he appears to be, suffice to say. He's very much entwined with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and United Nations projects and all of this, which pretty much tells you all you need to know, right? Next, please. Okay, so we're getting into another very telling bloodline here, very far-reaching one, and it's the Bush family, which goes a little bit further than you might think. Next, please. So this is an article that appeared in mainstream newspapers in the UK several years ago. I know you can't always trust mainstream newspapers, but I'm mentioning that it appeared there because a lot of people also don't trust, conspiracy sites or whatever, and it's not until it appears in something like the Daily Mail that they take it seriously. But here we have Village Idiot Bush in the centre there, and some of the people that he's related to. Now, this is all distantly, so it's all cousins, 12 times removed and all this kind of thing, but nevertheless, it's the same family, extended. So, among the people that he's related to one way or another are Brad Pitt, Marilyn Monroe, John Kerry, his political opponent, because, we live in a democracy where we have choice, right? Hugh Hefner, Pocahontas, wow. Tom Hanks, Abraham Lincoln, Celine Dion, Madonna, and Vlad the Impaler. Nice family. Next, please. Then looking at Madonna herself, we've had various articles that have come out over the years, and they all act as if it's a complete surprise. And isn't it amazing? We've just discovered that Madonna just happens to be related to Ellen DeGeneres here. And isn't that amazing? Next, please. And it turns out that she's also related to Lady Gaga. But don't worry, it's just a coincidence and nothing to worry about, as David Icke would say. And in all seriousness, these articles are presented randomly and standalone, and the journalists, so-called, never think to look any further into what other connections there might be, or how unusual it is that these people just happen to be related. Next, please. And this is the myth that we're so often fed. This comes from Madonna herself. It was the opening sequence to her 1985 video, The Virgin Tour, wrongly named. And she stated in this video, I went to New York, I had a dream. I wanted to be a big star. I didn't know anybody. I wanted to dance, I wanted to sing, I wanted to do all those things. I wanted to make people happy, I wanted to be famous, I wanted everybody to love me. I wanted to be a star. I worked really hard, and my dream came true. So this is what they want you to believe, that, and what they want our kids to believe, that if you want to be the next Madonna, if you want to be the next Lady Gaga, if you want to be the next Barack Obama in politics, all you got to do is just work really hard and stay focused and cross your fingers for good luck, and you too could achieve these lofty heights. And of course, it doesn't work like that, as we're discovering, but they continue to perpetuate this myth, this lie. And note Madonna's nice Freemasonic jacket there with the illuminating capstone of the pyramid at the top. Next, please. I love telling this story because it never grows boring. So these guys are the Copeland brothers. And it's another example of both military intelligence connections and family bloodline connections in music. So we have, on the left there, Ian Copeland. On the far right, you've got Miles Copeland Jr. And in the middle, people might recognise Stuart Copeland, the drummer with the band The Police. Now, the patriarch of this family, Miles Copeland Sr., was a big-time career CIA guy. He worked for the agency for decades. He had postings in different parts of the world. The Copeland boys were actually born in Beirut when the father was based out there. And a few years later, all three of them crop up with prominent roles in the music industry connected to the punk and new wave movement. So we know about Stuart Copeland. He's in the band The Police with Sting and the others. Then you have Ian and Miles, who between them come to run companies which they call International Records Syndicate, or IRS. Copeland International Associates, CIA, and Frontier Booking International. I'll leave you to work that one out. So, do you ever get the impression they're taking the piss and mocking us with these things? And of course we have The Police with Sting, as in a sting operation. Next, please. So we're getting into punk and new wave now. I did a show with Crow and Jason just the other week, where we really delved into some of the interesting backgrounds of punk musicians. That's a great show, if you haven't heard it. This is the New York Dolls. So we've got a connection to this city here. They were one of the early acts that kind of ushered in that whole movement, along with Iggy Pop and the Stooges and the Ramones and groups such as this, the Velvet Underground, I guess you can put into that. Next, please. Here we've got David Bowie, Iggy Pop and Lou Reed. I think this one was taken in London, actually. Got an idea it was. And this was at the very start of what came to become the punk scene in New York. And you also had the British version of the punk scene emerging in the mid-70s, more or less simultaneously with what was going on in New York. Next, please. Which leads to some interesting questions about how contrived and manufactured that whole scene may have been, as opposed to one that evolved organically in a grassroots fashion. That would be the first, wouldn't it? Would for me. We've got various key venues in New York, which are just worth a mention. Max's Kansas City, which was open from 1965 to 1981. So it just caught the tail end of the New York punk scene. It became a very key venue for musicians like the Ramones, the Patti Smith Group, Television, Talking Heads, Blondie. They all played gigs at this place. Next, please. And similarly, CBGBs, which originally stood for Country, Bluegrass and Blues. And this was a Hell's Angel biker hangout in the early 70s before it kind of morphed into one of the key punk venues in New York as well. And many of those groups that I just mentioned played their own gigs here as well. Next, please. And here we've got the Sex Pistols, managed by Malcolm McLaren over on the left there, who really spearheaded the whole British punk movement, and that dovetailed in and overlapped in many ways with what was going on in New York. McLaren is also an interesting character to study. I've got a lot of stuff about him in my Musical Truth Volume 2 book. He always skirted around the edges of paedophilia, and he seemed to delight in the controversy that brought. He had a magazine that he put out for a while in the 70s known as Chicken. And anyone that's ever looked into Pizzagate and some of these terms that the FBI has identified as being used to denote young children that are passed around paedophile rings for abuse will be familiar with the term chicken, which means a young boy. And Malcolm McLaren also put a 14-year-old girl, Annabella Lewin, on the cover of a record by Bow Wow Wow, which is another group that he managed in the 80s. So we all seem to enjoy the controversy that this flirting with pedophilic activity would bring. Nice chap. Next, please. Now, the Chelsea Hotel. We went into this one big time on the podcast as well. Let's go to the next slide. So, this particular institution is just a stone's throw away from here in Chelsea, in Manhattan. And it's quite amazing when you go into its very unsettling and dark history. So it's worth going into this because it will blow your mind. So we find out, when we study this particular place, Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001, A Space Odyssey there. The beat poets Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso were residents. Jack Kerouac wrote one of his novels there. Arthur Miller wrote The Chelsea Effect. Dylan Thomas was staying there when he's said to have died of pneumonia on the 9th of November, 9/11, 1953. Charles Jackson, author of The Lost Weekend, committed suicide in his room on the 21st of September, the autumn equinox, in 1968. Others who have called the Chelsea home at some point or other include the occultist Harry Everett Smith, who died in room 328, Stanley Kubrick, Ethan Hawke, Dennis Hopper, Eddie Izzard, Uma Thurman, Elliot Gould, Jane Fonda, and Russell Brand. Punk's D.D. Ramone wrote a book, apparently fictionalised, where he talked of groups in robes holding occult rituals in the hotel's basement. Why wouldn't that surprise me? Next, please. And there's more. Other musical links include Madonna's residency in the Chelsea Hotel in the early 80s. She returned there in 1992 to shoot photographs for her book Sex in room 822. The very same room attracted Taylor Momsen's band, The Pretty Reckless, for a photo shoot. The British dance group La Rouge shot one of their videos there, as did Depeche Mode's David Garn. The Grateful Dead, Tom Waits, Patti Smith, Iggy Pop, Jeff Beck, Dee Dee Ramone, Phil Lynott, Cher, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Alice Cooper, Janis Joplin, Bette Midler, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix, Canned Heat, and Leonard Cohen all spent time there. Did we leave anyone out? The Chelsea itself has been the subject of many movies, including 9.5 Weeks, the Japanese horror Hotel Chelsea, 2001's Chelsea Walls, and the 2008 documentary Chelsea on the Rocks. And another link, just to completely blow your mind if it's not been fried yet, is the story that several survivors of the Titanic are said to have stayed for some time after the disaster in 1912, as the hotel is close to the Pier 54 dock where the liner is supposed to have arrived. And when we keep with punk music, the Chelsea Hotel is, of course, where Nancy Spungen, the girlfriend of Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols, met her end, as immortalised in the movie Sid and Nancy. And the official take on that is that Sid stabbed her to death in a heroin-induced haze. But there's more to that story that meets the eye, and it would appear that Sid was put out there as a scapegoat for this particular crime, and that the true guilt lies elsewhere. Sid didn't last very long after that himself. He was dead by the 3rd of February 1979 of a heroin overdose. This all happened on the 12th of October in 1978, incidentally, which also turns out to be the birthday of Aleister Crowley, but I'm sure it's just a coincidence. So that's punk's connection to the Chelsea. And also, interestingly, you had a record by Elvis Costello, who was a British-Irish new wave artist, and he put out a song called I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea in 1978. And it wouldn't surprise me if that song is all about the Chelsea Hotel, and it reveals some knowledge on his part of the sort of stuff that goes on there. He's got a lyric in there that goes, "Men in white coats shake you gently by the throat," and stuff like this. Next, please. We're getting into hip-hop now then, and a connection, a very loose kind of segue between punk and hip-hop, and it comes from the relationship between Johnny Rotten, John Lydon and the Sex Pistols, and also Malcolm McLaren, who managed him, and this dude, Africa Bambaataa. Just a matter of interest, how many people are here today from New York City? Okay. How many people have heard of Africa Bambaataa? Okay, it's about half the room. I asked that because Bambaataa hit the headlines 3 years ago in 2016 in some pretty unfortunate circumstances, where a couple of guys who had been members of the Universal Zulu Nation, which is this organisation that he helped during the 70s and 80s, accused him of having sexually molested them when they were minors, going back to the 70s and the 80s. So Africa Bambaataa is universally hailed as one of the 3 founding fathers of hip-hop culture, coming out of the Bronx in New York. The others would be Grandmaster Flash and Kool Herc, who's acknowledged as the originator of hip-hop and the DJing side of things. Next slide, please. So here's an early picture from the Bronx of those formative years of hip-hop culture just starting to take shape. Next, please. And you had the venue, the Latin Quarter, which was legendary in the mid to late 80s for hip-hop. In much the same way as CBGBs and Maxes were pivotal to the punk scene, Latin Quarter was where hip-hop really took a hold in the mid-80s, as well as Union Square. Next, please. So back to Bambaataa, who up until 2016 had a reputation that was pretty much godlike and was very much intact. He was universally revered and put up on a pedestal by anyone that was into hip-hop culture as one of the guys that got the whole foundation moving. But then you had these allegations from these guys in the Universal Zulu Nation. And what surprised me was the degree to which the whole thing just seemed to have been covered up by the mainstream media, and nothing was heard of it. You had this story covered by a few websites online, but by and large, no mainstream newspapers or TV or radio channels were touching it. And this was at the time that we were getting revelations about the likes of Kevin Spacey and Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein. So you might think that there would be this appetite for throwing Bambaataa into the mix when it comes to allegations of sexual impropriety. But something has been protecting this guy from scrutiny, it would seem. Next slide, please. Just got some suspect symbolism from Bambaataa from over the years here. He's doing the old devil horn sign there. Next, please. And there it is again, later years, complete with transhumanist sunglasses. Next, please. Round about the time that the Bambaataa controversy was breaking and was being covered just on a few online radio stations, not by the big stations like Hot 97 and these radio stations that pride themselves on being the voice of hip-hop culture. You had KRS-One, who also is revered as a hero of hip-hop. He's an MC that emerged in the 1980s with his group Boogie Down Productions, and he came to Bambaataa's apparent defense in an interview by saying that he didn't give a fuck whether he'd done it or not. He couldn't care less. He said it didn't take anything away from the man, it didn't take anything away from his contribution to the culture. Who cares if he got up to this? And at the same time, a video emerged of KRS-One in a Q&A session, apparently admitting to being a Freemason, although he didn't actually say that. So he stated, "I'm not a Freemason, but I know a lot of Masons, and they trust me with their secrets," which is as good as saying you're a Mason. So he's saying it without saying it. But that is an example of masterful speaking, which comes out of Freemasonry. It's one of the tenets of how they reveal what they do. So here he is giving one of the popular Masonic signs, and so he got embroiled in that whole mess, and there was some back and forthing going on between prominent hip-hop artists at the time. Next slide, please. So really, the only place you're going to get a chance to really delve into this story of Bambaataa and these sexual allegations against him is going to be this upcoming documentary by a Chicago journalist by the name of Layla Wills. She's pretty much the only person that has shown an interest in this story and trying to get to the bottom of it. And she's working on this documentary known as Trapped in a Culture, or Rap Cult. And I've had a few conversations with her. I've done a couple of podcasts with her. And she and I both have the suspicion that hip-hop culture and the way it evolved has some links with Freemasonry and with different fraternities within that order, with a few other secret societies probably in there as well. It's a devastating thing for me to have to acknowledge, because I've been a hip-hop DJ and writer for many years, and I've loved the music. I don't love what it is now. What it's been for the last 20 years, as far as I'm concerned, is not hip-hop, whatever else it may be. I'm talking about the golden era of the 80s and 90s. That's when I came up as a DJ, and I love the music, I love the culture. So it's very difficult to have to come to terms with the idea that that whole scene, like so many others, may have been contrived and manufactured. But it is what it is, and if you seek the truth genuinely, you have to go wherever it takes you. Next, please. Grandmaster Flash, as I mentioned, one of the other founding fathers of hip-hop culture, recently picked up the Polar Prize, which is known as the Nobel Prize for Music, coming out of Sweden, presented by the King of Sweden right here. So this is a very far cry from what the origins of hip-hop culture is supposed to be all about, coming from the streets, coming out of these neighborhoods in the South Bronx. And here's this guy accepting an award from royalty. You know, it's all a bit suspect to me. Next, please. Jay-Z and Kanye West, it kind of speaks for itself really, doesn't it? These two prominent artists for the past several years, here they are fashing up a couple of hand signals, which they will tell you is the rock sign. This is what Jay-Z will tell you. It represents his record label, which was originally called Rockefeller Records, go figure, after one of his heroes, before it morphed into Rock Nation. So when they do these signs, they say, it's the rock sign, it's a diamond, man, we're just celebrating life, celebrating having made it, you know. But of course, anyone that's looked into Freemasonry, secret societies, occult symbolism, we know better, right? Next. Just mentioning the disco scene coming out of New York as well. Just trying to cover all genres here. Studio 54, we heard a mention of this earlier. Donald Trump used to like hanging out here, apparently, as did many celebrities. Interesting thing about Donald Trump's father, Fred, as well, who we heard about earlier. He was very instrumental in the project housing that went up around the various boroughs of New York. And this has been endlessly referenced in hip-hop records. You know, these social housing places known as the projects. Fred Trump was, put many of those in, just as a matter of interest. Next. So we had Studio 54, this legendary discotheque in the 1970s. We also had the Paradise Garage with Larry Levan, the DJ that was very much the helm of that. I'm not entirely sure why there's a picture of Robin Williams there, but it was always there in the DJ booth for some reason. Next, please. This guy is David Mancuso. And in the early 1970s, he ran what was not really a club, it was an institution or a community, you could say, known as the Loft. And it's credited with having paved the way for the disco scene, which came later in the 70s in New York, and gave way to venues like Studio 54, the Paradise Garage. Next, please. So looking into David Mancuso, this is an excerpt from my last book as well. As I say, much credit for the ushering in of the disco scene has been given to the parties hosted by Mancuso. In his Broadway apartment known as the Loft. There were various different lofts, but the first one was downtown in Broadway. The first of them was on Valentine's Day 1970 and was titled Love Saves the Day. What do those initials spell? So Mancuso's loft sessions seem to have operated as some kind of communal living experiment. He turns out to have had an association with Dr. Timothy Leary, who was very tied into the hippie counterculture scene. He was the acid guru. He was the guy responsible for popularizing LSD during those pivotal years. And of course, he had ties to the CIA by his own admission in later interviews. Tim Lawrence, in the book Love Saves the Day, A History of American Dance Music Culture, writes, the psychedelic guru Timothy Leary, who invited David to his house parties, popularized a philosophy around the psychedelic experience that would inform the way records were selected at the Loft, was another echo that resonated at the Broadway Loft. Coexisting with Leary, the civil rights, the gay liberation, the feminist and the anti-war movements of the 1960s were manifest in the egalitarian Rainbow Coalition, come as you are ethos of the Loft. Now that to me sounds like an early example of the type of social engineering and culture creation that we have going on right now. All these different scenes and movements and trends all being brought together under one umbrella. And there it was happening at the Loft in the early 1970s under the stewardship of David Mancuso, who has links to Timothy Leary and who knows what else. So again, this calls into question the authenticity of this scene, of the whole disco scene and what led to it. These are awkward questions, but they're questions that somebody like me has to ask. Next, please. The World Trade Center. So here we have the construction of it starting in 1968, 33 years before the events of 2001. And we're getting into the mind control aspects of this presentation now, just to round off. Next, please. So people might be familiar with the concept of what's been called predictive programming. And this is where aspects of some event, which is known to be coming in the real world, and this could be a hoax event, by the way. So the event doesn't have to be genuine in terms of the way it's presented to us by the media. The important thing is that there's a narrative that the public is being trained to accept and believe as being true. And predictive programming is a method of planting aspects of it in popular culture in the run-up to the event. So this can happen in Hollywood movies, it can happen in TV shows, cartoons, record sleeves, and magazines. And what we have here is David Rockefeller, who was very instrumental in the construction of the World Trade Center towers in 1967 on the cover of Newsweek magazine. And he's displaying his wristwatch down there, and it's been noted that if you close in on the wristwatch, you can see that the time displayed on it is 9 and 11. And here we have an ad from the very same magazine with the guy with a design on his sweatshirt that looks very similar to the Twin Towers. Next, please.
Tarantino was a cigarette. I think that's also the name of a bridge in New York. A lot of New Yorkers, there's the Tarantino Bridge.
So this is a record sleeve that's been endlessly analysed the last few years in the internet era. It's from the British group Supertramp. It dates back to 1979. It's an album called Breakfast in America. And what you have is a view from an aeroplane window coming in over Manhattan with the World Trade Center towers there. Now somebody noticed that if you do a mirror image reversal of this sleeve, next please, an interesting phenomenon occurs. Now, in the Supertramp logo, directly above the Twin Towers, you have what appears to be a 9 and an 11. And bear in mind, this is a view from an aeroplane window in the morning at breakfast time, coming in over Manhattan. Next, please. Now, if that were an isolated incident, you could chalk it up as just one of those things, a coincidence, just the way it goes, as many people do, but it's not the only example that we have of 9/11 predictive programming. This is a sleeve from the group Def Leppard, again a British group, and they had an album called Pyromania, and on the sleeve you have aspects of what came to pass on 9/11 there. Next please. Doesn't end there. A hip-hop group called The Coup. You don't hear much of them these days, I can't think why that is. But this album came out in June 2001, so it's just a few weeks before the events of September 11th. And here you have a very clear depiction of what we were shown on September 11th of that year, 3 months before it actually happened. And you can see the guy here is detonating some kind of remote control detonator. Next please. So that's how these mind games work, and that's how mind control is perpetuated through things like record sleeves. And none of us would ever imagine it's there, right? Another thing you wouldn't imagine is that there could be anything sinister or unsettling about that nice company, Disney, that so many of our kids watch their movies and such. So here we've got the Mickey Mouse Club, which was this kind of grooming ground, probably more truth to that phrase than meets the eye, for young stars such as Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera and such. They all came out of the Disney Corporation and became future pop acts. Next please. Britney Spears here, pictured many years later, sporting Mickey Mouse ears. Now this goes beyond just a straight homage to the Disney Corporation. It's actually a symbol of trauma-based mind control programming, which goes on in the industry big time. I've got a big section on this in my first book, looking at how it plays out. This is aspects of MK Ultra, modern programming and such, and it's very big in the industry. Next please. And you'll find quite a number of prominent artists displaying Mickey Mouse ears. This is emblematic of mind control programming having been done on these people. Here's Madonna expressing the same icon. Next. Somebody sent me this. This is kind of interesting when you do a mirror image reversal of Mickey. As this person has here, it comes out spelling wicked. So it's not as if we're not given the opportunity to know. And often it comes down to inversion and reversals, if you want to get to the truth. Next, please. Nicki Minaj, a very good example of a mind-controlled artist of recent years, displaying all the symptoms of it. Next. Here she is in a song with the rapper B.O.B, and the song was called Out of My Mind. And in it, she's wearing a straitjacket, and she's in a mental institution. Go figure. Next, please. Mariah Carey, now we get into modern programming here. The monarch butterfly, this very distinctively coloured orange butterfly, is a motif associated with this particular aspect of mind control, and many of your favourite artists will have undergone it. Mariah Carey is a good example. Next, please. Here's an account of a nervous breakdown that she's supposed to have suffered in 2001, but this is actually code for mind control programming having broken down in the same way that Britney Spears did that time that she went mad and shaved her head and started attacking cars with umbrellas. Next, please. It goes all the way back. This is Syd Barrett, the original frontman of Pink Floyd, coming out of the 1960s. And traditional rock music legend has it that Syd fried his brains on too much LSD back in the 60s. But again, when you look at some of his behaviours and some of the strange things that went on, it's very consistent with Syd having been a mind control subject himself, particularly as his father was a scientist that was connected with that style of research. Next, please. And we're rounding off here with Paul McCartney, or is it? And this is from his most recent video called Who Cares, from his new album Egypt Station. This video is absolutely laden with mind control triggers. These black and white spirals have been identified as triggers involved in programming. So even if you don't accept that there's some skullduggery afoot with McCartney, and if you accept that it's the original guy that's been with us all along, there's still some explaining to do as to why he's got mind control triggers embedded in his latest video, if he's just this nice old guy that writes a few songs and just wants us all to enjoy them. What's that? It's a butterfly, yeah. Yeah. It's another depiction of the butterfly. Yeah. Next, please. There's another still from the same video. You've got this girl who's clearly being abused. If you watch the video, you get it on YouTube. She's being abused and mind controlled through this thing. And McCartney is playing the role of her controller. Next, please. So, in rounding off then, this pretty much sums up the message that I want to leave you with. They lie to our faces, but they tell the truth cryptically for those who are able to decipher the obfuscation. So the nightly news and the proclamations of politicians will be pure deception, and usually a 180-degree inversion of the truth. Whereas it's in what we're trained to think of as fiction or entertainment that the truth so often lies, albeit concealed with layers of symbolism and allegory. Next, please. Okay, we can skip that. Skip to the next one. So much of what I've talked about today is in the 2 volumes of my book, Musical Truth Volume 1, next slide please, and Volume 2. I've got copies of them over here for anyone that's interested. And next slide please. My next book is on its way. It's written, it's at the typesetters, and you are the first people beyond my family to have seen what the cover is going to look like. It's called The Cause of the Cure, and it's an allegorical work of fiction, although there's a lot you can get away with under the guise of fiction, I tell you, in terms of dropping truth bombs. So I'm very excited about this one. This is going to be on the streets hopefully just before Christmas, so look out for that. Other than that, it's been a great honour to be here today. It's the first talk I've done of this nature in New York. I want to thank Billy Ray once again for putting the whole thing together. Thanks to Jason for the tech, and thanks to everyone for coming out.